Okay, so the first and only non-oxygen dependent step of cellular respiration takes place in the cytoplasm, which is right here. And this step is called glycolysis. In glycolysis, one molecule of glucose is broken up into two molecules of pyruvate, and during this process, two ATP is generated. Because at the beginning of the start of this process we needed 2 ATP, after investing that 2 ATP our return was 4 ATP, meaning the overall gain from this process was about 2 ATP. And on the other hand, with NADH, NADH is also produced during the cycle from NAD+. And these two NADH molecules skip the process of the Krebs cycle and go straight down to the electron transport chain. But speaking of the next cycle, um, the Krebs cycle, it is located in the matrix, and this is a diagram of the mitochondria, which represents the flaps, which is the cristae. That's where the electron transport chain is in the liquid inside, which is actually the matrix, so that's the Krebs cycle. But anyway, here is a picture of the Krebs cycle, which is aerobic, unlike the anaerobic glycolysis cycle, which needs no oxygen, while this process needs oxygen. The Krebs cycle, which takes place in the matrix, starts when one of the two pyruvate acid molecules enter from glycolysis, and first citric acid production takes place. Pyruvic acid reacts in a way to create acetyl coenzyme, and when that happens, one molecule of carbon is produced, and two high-energy electrons are passed to NAD+ in the matrix to produce NADH. Acetyl coenzyme combines with a four-carbon compound in the Krebs cycle, which is already recycled from the circle from the whole entire process. So that's from here, and that and okay, so all of those combine to make a 6 citric acid molecule, which goes through this complicated process, but basically they lose two of these carbon molecules, and by constantly rearranging, this ends up making FADH and NADH and 2 ATP. Okay, so after this is the electron transport chain, which is right here. And in this step, is located in the cristae, which I told you earlier was the flaps in the mitochondria, and the FADH and NADH go through these electron carriers right here, which de-energize them, but that energy is used to move these H plus ions across the inner membrane to go through ATP synthase and make ATP, and this is the where 32 ATP is made. So this ATP synthase step makes the majority of the ATP for cellular respiration. And since all of these electrons have lost their energy because it's been used to move these across here, you can't just have random electrons floating there, or else it will clog up the process and cellular respiration won't be able to work. So basically that's why oxygen needs to come in, and oxygen is also called the I believe it's called the last um, electron acceptor, because it takes these de-energized or low energy electrons, combines it with some H plus, which makes O2, which is also a product of cellular respiration. Last, the last step, you may be asking, or actually, this is not the last step, but this takes place if there's not enough oxygen. But you might be asking, what happens if us animals do not have oxygen? Well, cellular respiration has to rely on another anaerobic process called lactic fermentation, and it's not as efficient as the actual cellular respiration process, including including the electron transport chain and the Krebs cycle and glycolysis. But we do this um, when our bodies don't have enough oxygen to produce ATP, or when we also need a burst of energy. So activities like swimming and short sprints use lactic acid fermentation. And in lactic acid fermentation, the pyruvic acid from glycolysis and NADH here makes um, lactic acid and NAD plus as a product, and the NAD plus gets recycled back into the glycolysis cycle. But the lactic acid here is like a waste product, so, and it's not good for you either. So this is what makes our muscles feel sore, but we urinate this out. So the whole entire point was just to get NAD to go back here. So lactic acid is something we don't really want in our body.